Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mike, and the rest of the team for the invitation to talk with everyone. In a room like this, I'm guessing most of you have heard about the growing population of our world. The statistics say that currently we have about 7.6 billion people, which is expected to reach close to 9.5 billion by 2050, and that's numbers are expected to continue to grow to about 10 billion by the time we reach the mid-2050s. Along with the growing population comes all these challenges, right? When you think about that, you think about what Martha was talking about this morning and Dipti about how those people are going to need to eat. They're going to have to deal with the changing climate. We're going to need energy for them. All these different aspects are really big problems that are going to need to be solved in the near future. I was sharing this information with a group of students at North Star High School a couple years ago. And as I got to the big problem part of this, a guy way in the back raised his hand and he said, "So, this sounds like a really big problem." I'm like, "Yeah, exactly, it's really big, you're listening to me." And then he said, "Well, why are you so excited about it?" I said, "Well, that's a really good question." Thankfully, I was on my toes that morning, and I said, I talk with a lot of kids like you, and I know what you're capable of. I've seen you design things. I've seen your creativity. I'm just excited to see how you're going to solve these huge problems that are challenging our world. And that's a big part of what is necessary, right? Is preparing these future STEM professionals that are going to go make these innovative technologies to solve these big problems. However, I'd like to argue that even more importantly is preparing a society that can handle those technologies. Developing a science and technology literate society that can discuss these problems, that can discuss climate change and have meaningful conversations, that can vote for leaders, that can develop policies that will help us handle these changes, that will vote with their dollars when they go to the grocery store and decide whether to feed their families GMOs or organic or something entirely different. And that's really what the Science Literacy Initiative at Nebraska is all about. We're thinking about how can we create this society that's capable of making effective decisions grounded in STEM and informed analyses of all these complex real-world challenges. So how are we going to do that? And I think it's safe to say in a room like this, we have a lot of these skills, right? When you look around and you think about the opportunities we have to come to events like this, which I'm really thankful that we get to have these conversations and develop these communities. But when you look next to you, think about who's not in this room, right? We have a privilege to be here, to have the time off of work, to have all these different things that are allowing us to be here and having these meaningful discussions. So let's take a minute and step back a little bit and think about why this is such a big challenge. So we live in an information age. If I have a question, I can easily open up my phone, I can ask Siri, I can Google it, I can find all these answers. However, what's missing is the ability to discern what is truthful information and what maybe is not so truthful. Maybe even more important and more troubling is the ability to read and honestly consider viewpoints that may not align with my own, right? The confirmation bias, when you're searching for information on the internet, it's so easy to say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about because they're not really thinking what I'm thinking. So I'm going to go find a different source that confirms what I already want to believe is true. And I know we have a lot of amazing science journalists and communications people in this room, so this is in no way slamming what you do. Your work is super important. However, when you think about reading a scientific journal article, those are written in almost a different language, right? It's words that may have a totally different meaning to us as scientists, like significance and correlation, means something totally different to the general public. And so in order to make this scientific research accessible to everyday people, a lot of that extra information has to be cut. And by cutting that, you end up with conclusions that all of a sudden don't really make the same sense as they would if you had the whole article to consider and read through. So when we think about what people in society actually know, there's actually been a lot of work done in that area. The National Science Foundation puts out the Science and Engineering Indicators pretty regularly. It's all available online. It's really fun to dig through if you have some free time. One of the things they look at is, what do people know? And so this is a little quiz. So I'm skipping class today so I can talk to you. So pop quiz time. I have a couple questions for you to think through about what do people know about factual scientific content. So we'll start off easy. I know you weren't prepared for this. So first off, does the Earth go around the sun, or does the sun go around the Earth? Everybody knows the answer, right? I know somebody might be thinking, well, it depends on your frame of reference. But, okay, we're going to assume, right, that we're not the center of the universe. We're not the center of our solar system. The Earth goes around the sun. And when you think about the general public, though, 73% of the people surveyed in 2010 were able to answer this question correctly. So a little troubling, right? But really, this doesn't change how you live your daily life. So it's okay. We can handle that. So moving on to the next question, a little bit trickier here. The cloning of living things produces genetically identical copies. So this one, actually more people got right, which I attribute to sci-fi movies, right? This is the plot line for so many movies. So of course they know like the genetic thing and they're cloning, so that makes sense. But again, does this really affect your daily life? Probably not too much, unless you're making some weird decisions. The last one, I think, hits a little closer to home. So ordinary tomatoes do not contain genes, while genetically modified ones do. A little trickier, right? For this question, this is basically a true or false, right? So 50-50 would be random guessing. 47% of the people responding were able to answer this question correctly. So basically, nobody knows. Which, again, so when you think about this, daily life, when you go to the grocery store and something says genetically modified, that becomes a little bit more scary, right? So let's step back here for a second. What does that mean? So imagine for a second that you thought that, right? That you thought that genetically modified something contains genes. Normal food, no genes. Gets a lot scarier, right? I can see how somebody would be terrified to think, oh, I don't want to eat this food because it has genetic information in it. In fact, in 2015, there was a study out of Oklahoma State that showed that 80% of respondents, general public again, was in favor of labeling foods whether or not they contain DNA. So over lunch, you can think about, what am I eating that doesn't contain DNA, right? I mean, it's everywhere. So before you jump to the conclusion that potentially this is a problem with our education system, that's not true. So when you look at the Nebraska state science standards, and this is really tiny, I was cutting a couple of sections out for you to look at. In 5th grade, students are learning that energy comes from the sun to the plants, to either us as food or animals as food. And so energy is progressing through living things. And then by 6th grade, they're learning about hereditary information and genetics and how that's all translated through plants and animals. So plants and animals contain genes. We eat plants and animals for food. They should be able to answer the tomato question, right? So where's the disconnect? So let's take a quick cookie break. So in grad school, I spent some time volunteering at a homeless shelter for teenagers. At the homeless shelter, I met a kid named Zenobio. Zenobio was 14 years old, about to turn 15, about the time I met him, his birthday. So I'm like, okay, he's my new buddy. I'm going to make him cookies for his birthday. It seems like the nice thing to do. So I brought him his cookies. We were enjoying his cookies at his birthday party. And then he got this weird look on his face and said, hey, where did you get these cookies? The containers, like, it doesn't look like it's from the store. And so I said, oh, I made the cookies. And then he got really confused and like, wait, you can make cookies? I thought you had to buy them at the store. And so you have to understand, I grew up basically in the kitchen. I was baking bread with my grandma. I was making cookies for my dad in the field. My brother and I, when we were old enough to stay by ourselves, we were making our own recipes and doing crazy stuff. So it didn't take me long to decide, Zenobio must learn to bake. And so the next week, I brought all the cookie supplies. We made chocolate chip cookies. And then Zenobia was suddenly empowered to think, hey, I can make things. What about brownies? Could we do that? Sure. So the next week we made brownies. And this continued on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Eventually we were making cheesecake and all sorts of things. Zenobia had moved from a consumer to a creator. He was empowered to be a decision maker by his experiences with creating and problem solving. So just because you can bake cookies doesn't mean you can talk about climate change, right? It really depends on what area you're empowered in. So what could this look like in application? So this is a brief overview of a lot of different projects happening around science literacy. So it could look like, instead of baking cookies, it could be developing your own fitness tracker, right? Showing somebody that they're capable of creating that kind of technology. It could look like developing your own robot. It could look like developing a sustainability plan to manage a farm in high school. These are projects that we have ongoing right now that are doing a lot of these really cool things. So the cool thing about empowering creators is that it's also a lot of fun. So just last night, I was at Innovation Studios over on Innovation Campus, which is a makerspace over there. If you have another chance, check it out. It's a really cool space. Using virtual reality to help youth see themselves as creators, not just consumers. So what we were doing is using a virtual modeling program to build a bubble wand. So imagine that when you buy a cup of bubbles and that thing pulls out and you get to blow bubbles through it, they're making their own bubble wands. Pretty simple application, but they're making it themselves in virtual space and then translating that file to a 3D printer where we can test it in the real world. So going virtual to real all in the span of a couple of hours, which was really exciting for the students. They saw themselves as suddenly becoming these creators. Like I mentioned, it's a lot of fun. My PA on this project is Brad Barker, the guy giving me bunny ears. So doing this type of work is really a fun thing to do. But empowering students, empowering youth can look a lot of different ways. So one project we have with college youth, go out into the community and work with youth in after-school programs and children's museums. And the cool thing about this is that engineering students are doing this. So they're learning a lot more about their engineering fundamentals, because in order to teach it, they're realizing, I really got to know my stuff, because the kids come with tough questions. But they also learn that they can have an impact on younger generations. And a lot of my students are continuing on to have this volunteer kind of altruistic aspect when they have their own children and things like that. So again, like I mentioned, agriculture is really central to a lot of these decisions that our future youth our leaders are going to be making. So a lot of our programming centers around agriculture. And when you think about agriculture, the sustainability of agriculture is a big question for our youth to understand. The other side that's really important is systems thinking. So systems thinking is the idea that if I make a change here, right, it affects things here and up here, and you can't just think about things in silos. So with the systems thinking idea, youth are using different modeling programs through a game-based environment in order to make decisions on a virtual farm to then learn about systems thinking. This project is led by J.M. Sabaya, who's sitting back in the room, funded by NSF, and is really a cool way to get youth interested in agriculture and the technology aspect. But one really cool part of this project happened early on. We were collaborating with some students from the College of Fine and Performing Arts to work on a graphical interface. So agricultural students typically aren't that well suited for designing the characters and the backgrounds and all the art that goes into developing a virtual game. And so we were working with these students that had those skills. However, they didn't know much about agriculture. One student in the class had an ag background. And so we had some of our Kasner students come talk with the College of Fine and Performing Arts students. And this was one of those magical times. Have you ever had those moments where you kind of pinch yourself and it's like, this is really happening? Because it became a safe space for them. We had other people come in and talk about irrigation and talk about cattle, but this was their peers. And so we're allowing this opportunity to have this conversation, peer-to-peer, about agriculture. And the students in the art class were asking all the right questions. We didn't script any of this. We were like, okay, ask what you want to ask. They were asking silly things from, do cowboys really wear boots? One of the students was wearing a really nice pair of boots. He's like, I'm not going to wear these couple $100 pair of boots. To why do they wear a hat? And And then they had some really meaningful questions, like what is the role of women in agriculture? What does your mom do? What is the role of community in agriculture? And they were able to start understanding the risks of agriculture and how that whole system really comes into play. And I think this idea of bringing people from diverse perspectives together is really important. Another way we've done this is through educating educators about research that's done on campus. We've run summer programs where educators in K-12 will come either to campus or we'll go to them, and we'll share just a little bit about our pathways and then how they can teach their students about real engineering research or real agricultural research. And the one thing that's really interesting here is that these two really diverse audiences, you would think, the researchers on campus and the elementary school teachers out in the real world, love hanging out together. They could talk forever. Like you could have listened to the professors talk about their research all day. And so just having those meaningful conversations and not assuming that, well, they don't really care about what I do, but being able to translate that into ways that they can understand is really key. And having those conversations about what that pathway looks like. How did I end up being a university professor? Another way we're attempting to increase that collaboration between diverse audiences is through a new program called Cultivate Access. This is a new mentoring program that's bringing together career professionals in STEM-related agricultural fields. If you're interested, let me know. I'll get you signed up. That represent women and minorities in those careers, to work with undergraduates as well as high school students that are also underrepresented minorities and women, and helping them see themselves in those careers. So helping them see that pathway of how they can be involved is empowering for them. On one hand, it helps them potentially join that STEM career pipeline, but it also gives them access to think about themselves as contributors, regardless of their career pathway, to the whole discussion about agriculture, about climate change, about what to feed your family. All those different topics really become something that they see themselves capable of doing, instead of something like, oh, that's for the smart people, or that's for the people that fit in these different lenses. So this is really important work, because this is our future, right? These are our future leaders, our future decision makers. These students will be helping us meet the challenges and also discussing those challenges in ways that will help us move society forward and meet the challenges of 2050 and 9.5 billion people. So I've given you a really brief overview of a lot of different ways we can see science literacy impacting the youth in our world. So now I want to turn the tables on you. So what is your role? How do you bring your research, how do you bring your expertise and use that to empower students and youth to become those creators and problem solvers and decision makers? Thank you for your time.